How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of Perfect Reload Weekly, where we take a look back at the week in video game news. My name is Steve, and I'm joined, as always, by the worst Best Buy open box deal in history, Christian Slater. Christian, how you doing this week?
Another week trapped inside a body with a VCR for a butthole.
Yep. So this week was an interesting one. We... For the majority of the week, there wasn't much going on that I was going to have to talk about. You know, a couple smaller news stories going on, but then we got hit with the big one, which we'll get to in the news section. But I actually had the time this week, and I guess, for lack of a better term, the drive, to actually play a bunch of video games. So I was going to start with Terra Nil, but there has been a murder. Murder is afoot. So for April Fools, Sega released a visual novel murder mystery called The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. And this is a real game that you can download. It is free. I got it through Steam. I don't know if it's available other places. I assume you could probably just download it from their website or something. I played a little bit of it. It's not really for me. I'm not a big Sonic fan. Like I like Sonic just fine. You know, I grew up in the Sonic era, but I'm far from like a big super fan or anything like that. The last Sonic game I played a little bit of that Sonic Origins. I think like whatever that one that came out some years ago that was like a throwback to the original games. I played a little bit of that. And, I played 1, 2, and 3 and Sonic and Knuckles when I was a kid. Here and there. I didn't have a Genesis growing up. I knew one person that had one. And so I played it very infrequently. It wasn't until I was an adult that I ended up getting pretty big into Genesis actually Sega collecting in general. I think mostly just because I didn't have Sega stuff growing up, save for I had a Game Gear instead of a Game Boy. But yeah, so the Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, it is a real game that you can play. It is a fully fleshed out, from what I could tell. I didn't finish it. I played it for about 20 minutes or so. But it's a visual novel. It's very like LA Noire, where you interrogate people and have to piece together, clues that you find. Each case or interrogation, or whatever you want to call it, is like a single screen. You're on a train, so it's like you go through the different cars of the train. And then when you're thinking, like literally the word think comes up on the screen. Then you have to play a little mini game, which is like a endless runner Sonic thing where it's just Sonic running. You can move up and down. It's like isometric, and then you collect rings, and then there's like spikes and other obstacles and jumps you have to make from platform to platform. And you have to collect a certain amount of rings to move forward. There are a couple times where I screwed up and didn't get enough rings, or I died because you could fall off the platform. And it just has you do it again. There doesn't seem to be any real consequence for not doing it. I was screwing around in the options when I booted the game up. And there does appear to be some stuff that makes the game easier. I didn't really find it hard because anytime I had the wrong answer, it was just like, well, try again. And eventually just through brute force, you eventually stumble onto the right answer. I don't know if it gets more complex as it goes along. I only did the first 2 interrogations. But if you're like a Sonic super fan, I think you'll get a lot more out of this. I'm not familiar with a lot of the characters. They're in it. Like, I've heard of Amy, but I don't know what game Amy is from. I've just seen pictures of her and know that her name is Amy. I didn't play any like the GameCube Sonic games or the Xbox 360 era Sonic games. I didn't play the newest Sonic game that came out last year. My best friend is actually like mega Sonic fan. I told him about this, so hopefully he's gotten a chance to play it because I think he'd probably really enjoy it because it's probably got a lot of nostalgia for him, and I'm sure there's some jokes in there that would totally land for him that would just go above my head because I don't understand the context. But I think that's a really cool April Fool's thing. I was actually talking about this with a buddy yesterday. We were talking about internet April Fool's jokes, and kind of they've scaled down a lot over the years. Like Google hasn't done one in a while, and Google used to have some really interesting ones. They did that Pokemon Go Google Maps thing that was really cool. They did that Pac-Man thing at one point. Reddit had the Periwinkle thing that was going nuts. Everybody got really into, and there was always some fun stuff. I don't like the mean April Fool's jokes, and what I mean by that is when like a company or a website or something will announce that something is happening that maybe people are really looking forward to, and it's like, oh, haha, no, it's not. Gotcha, April Fools. The one that I remember is, I think it was bloodydisgusting.com. I could be wrong. Could have been a different movie website. And this was obviously years ago. They announced that like Cloverfield 2 was happening. And I was really, really big fan of the first Cloverfield movie because I grew up watching Godzilla movies. And so it was kind of cool to have like a modern one to latch onto. And for years, people were always like, oh, are they going to make one? There's a lot of speculation that they were going to make a Cloverfield 2, and it obviously never happened. They ended up doing the offshoots and whatnot. But I remember when that joke came out, I was like, man, that one just kind of sucked. Like that one kind of stung a little bit. So that wasn't too cool. But, yeah, I would definitely, I don't know how long this game will be up. I don't see a real reason for them to take it down. But it is entirely possible that they will take it down. It is 100% free. So, download it, check it out. If you're a Sonic fan, I think you'll probably get something out of it. But then, moving on. So I, through the course of looking things up to talk about for this week, I always check game news, and I saw that there was a game that came out called Terra Nil that I had never heard of before. And I saw a screenshot, and I was like, this game looks pretty cool. Isometric. Looks, you kind of tell what a game looks like a lot of times from the screenshot. And I was like, that looks like something I might be interested in. I assume it's some type of strategy game. Maybe it's like a Civilization 4X type game. And then I saw the description in the reviews aggregator, and it said it was a reverse city builder. And I was like, well, I like city builders. What is a reverse city builder? That sounds interesting. So the game is actually, I would say it's actually kind of hard to describe what the game is. So it is, in fact, a reverse city builder. Each level has 3 stages. The first stage is you are essentially trying to prime the land. So it's an isometric game, looks very much like a SimCity-ish, kind of thing. But it's not a huge map. You can see the map. It's got the traditional thing. You move the mouse to the edge and it goes out. Everything's on a grid. It's square. And the first stage is you kind of priming the land. So it's like a apocalypse has happened and you're trying to bring life back to the world. So you have to irrigate the dirt, unpollute the water, stuff like that. And you have points that tick down as you move these objects, machinery. You have like an inventory of machinery, and just like you would lay a building down in SimCity, you're laying down like, oh, this thing will unpollute the water. And when you lay it down, you'll get like a hex grid that will show you like the area of effect. So you have to place them around and all that. And some machines have to link up to other machines. You kind of start with machines that will supply electricity, and then you attach machines to those machines that will then do other things. So there is strategy involved in placing things. And there's actually there's a demo out for the game if you're interested. The demo is very different than the retail release, I will say, because I was getting very frustrated with the demo. It was actually really hard to progress through the demo, but once you get into the main game, they have definitely simplified some things, made things a little bit more clear that were a little vague in the demo, and it was much easier. It was much easier to play the game, much more well defined, well described, all that. I thought the tutorialization of the demo was atrocious, especially because there wasn't much of one. And this game is like, you've never played a game like this before. You kind of need a little bit of help, in the right direction. That is definitely fixed in the final like retail release. So the second stage, after you get everything primed, the second stage is then growing things. You're growing forests. You're growing, and there's there's an ocean level where you're putting coral back into the ocean and getting everything. And you kind of have like 4 different biomes, and you have to fill requirements for each one. It kind of represents itself as a circle at the top, and then you kind of fill the wedges of the circle. It kind of looks like the game Simon, or like the wedges on like Trivial Pursuit. And so you have to hit, X number of percentage in each one. And you accomplish this by various ways. You self-controlled forest fires to like break things down and have fertile soil pop up along the way, and that'll help get ready to plant better things. Like you plant like grass, burn the grass down, use that ash to then build a forest, like that kind of thing. It's like an evolution on top of what you did in the previous stage.
I gotta say, watching you start forest fires in this game got my motor running, if you know what I mean. Vroom, vroom, daddy.
Ecology is sexy. And then the third stage, after you get all that done, then you have to recycle everything. The game is very much about conservation. So now you have to recycle everything. And that's a puzzle in and of itself. You have these like beacons that you drop down and you connect them with like a monorail so that these little machines can come out and recycle everything. So you have to figure out how to get from point A to point B, because as you recycle everything, you're not losing the things that generate you electricity and all this stuff. And you have to kind of like figure out exactly how am I going to do this. And the way I have done it is, so everything goes to like a central base that you lay down, and kind of where you put that base is important. You do want it to be kind of centrally located. I have looked at it like mopping a floor, right? Like when you mop a floor, you start the furthest away and then work your way back to where you begin. So that way, when you're done, you're done. You're not then walking across a wet floor, you ready to put the mop away and move on, let the floor dry. So that's kind of the way I have looked at this. And I know that I am doing like a terrible job describing it. You really need to just look at the game. Since the game has come out, it's gotten very good reviews. And there's plenty of YouTube videos out there. Like I said, there's a demo available. The game is $24.99 or $29.99. It's $30 or less. I can't remember. It's on PC and Netflix. I got it through Steam. And yeah, it is one of my favorite things I've played so far this year. Granted, we're very beginning of April where, this video is coming out, but for all intents and purposes, we're just wrapping up March. So only 3 months into the year. And there's only been a couple of like real heavy hitters, right? And this is definitely not a AAA game, but man, it has got its hooks in me. I'm definitely kind of stuck where I'm at in the game. I'm a few levels, multiple levels in at this point, The game apparently is not very long. It's only about 5 hours long. People are saying, I think I've put more than 5 hours in, but I'm not great with puzzles, so I'm sure it's taking me longer to get through it than maybe some people. But it is, like I said, when Hogwarts Legacy came out, that is, going to be competing at the end of the year for Game of the Year for me. And I think Terra Nil is going to be right up there with it. I really, really love this game. I've been trying to find something to scratch that itch of having a game to play. And, this has definitely done that. I really, really enjoying the game. Obviously it's only going to last so long. It's not a super long game. I don't know if there's really going to be reason to go back and play more of it after I'm done. But it's definitely going to be a game where in a year or 2 years, like I'm going to go back to it and play it because it's very enjoyable. It's very, very, very fun. So yeah, definitely check that one out if you're into city builder type stuff, strategy type stuff, puzzle-ish games, puzzle games that aren't like a traditional puzzle, that kind of thing, like not like Hexic or, something like that. So kind of the big release, I guess, this week. I can't remember if Resident Evil 4 Remake came out this past week or if it was the Friday before or whatever, but the show, MLB The Show 23 came out. Baseball season started. Thursday was opening day. So, perfect week to release your baseball game. Out on Switch, PS5, and Xbox. Game Pass game. So I'm playing it on Game Pass. And excuse me, I ran into a really interesting issue with the show. And it wasn't a game thing, it was a console thing. So I finally had the time to download the game and play a little bit. And the game was off, like really, really off. Like there was like this significant delay. When you're playing this game, sports games are very timing based. You want as low input lag as humanly possible. Very similar to like a first person shooter. And I've been playing the show for so long, and the core gameplay really doesn't change from year to year. So, and even when they do change things, in the options, they have a lot of options in this game. You can just revert back to like a previous year style of the way you throw the ball or pitch or hit or whatever. So I've kind of got my settings that I always go to. I know what they're called. The second the game is done installing, I go into the options, I boom, 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 like a checklist. I set the game to play the way that I want to play it. And so I go in to play my first game, and I'm like way, way off, like trying to throw pitches. Like every pitch I'm throwing is like a wild pitch. Like it legitimately seems like there is something severely, severely wrong with the input lag in this game. So I was like, all right. So I back out of it and I go into just like the practice mode and load up as a hitter and try to swing and hit the ball. And I am just like way, way off. Like the ball, like I press the button to swing, the ball is in the catcher's glove and then my animation plays. And I'm like, something is like really, really off with this. So the game is brand new at this time. So I'm trying to like look up. I'm like, is there like a bug going on? And I can't find anything. So I was like, all right. So I put the game down and I come back to it a couple days later. And I was like, all right, I got to figure this out. So I load the game back up and I was like, maybe it was like one of those things where, you know, sometimes if you're loading a console, I don't know if this still happens, but it used to happen back in the day, where if you're like loading up a console and you're like moving the sticks on the controller while you do it, like the calibration will be off. I was like, maybe I did something weird with my controller. You know, when I initially booted the Xbox at that time, because, you know, the Xbox has quick resume. So when I turn it back on, it just boots right back into the game. And so I was like, all right, let me hard quit out of the game. Let me hard reset the Xbox, you know, put the controller down next to me, not touch it. It boots back up and it's still doing it. And I was like, all right, there's got to be something going on. So I started doing some research into what would cause input lag at the system level on an Xbox, not necessarily tied to the show. And it's because the Xbox has Dolby Vision, which is one of the HDR standards. So you have HDR10, HDR10 Plus in Dolby Vision. And typically your television or a streaming service or whatever kind of picks its thing. Dolby Vision is kind of like what I would say is the standard. It's what HBO Max uses, Netflix uses, Disney uses. The Xbox has HDR10 and Dolby Vision. I think the PlayStation only has HDR10 and not 10 plus, and it does not have Dolby Vision. But there is in order to get Dolby Vision on your Xbox Series X, you actually have to download a Dolby Vision app and then turn it on. And then when you install the app and you go into your audio video settings in the system level of the Xbox, it'll say, what kind of HDR do you want to use? And then it gives you a bunch of options. And then now there are two new options at the bottom. Do you want to turn Dolby Vision on for games? And do you want to turn Dolby Vision on if you're watching movies? And I had turned both on because I was like, well, I want all the bells and whistles. Well, apparently that's the problem. That's the culprit, because the second I turned that off, everything went back to normal. So yeah, apparently Dolby Vision for gaming on Xbox has some kinks it needs to work out, because it is rough. I mean, it's unplayable. There's no way you could adapt to play that game. What's funny about it is I had it turned on for when I was playing that Diablo beta, and I'm wondering if maybe Diablo, the beta, just doesn't have HDR in it or Dolby Vision, and it kind of bypassed it, because I didn't have any input lag issues whatsoever while playing that. But I was glad to finally get that figured out and able to move on. So the core of MLB The Show 23. So I played a couple of just standard traditional baseball games. Everything plays great, looks great, presentation is really good. I've mentioned before, for sports games, I typically play them on mute so I can catch up on podcasts, catch up on YouTube, stuff like that. But anytime a sports game does come out, I am interested to hear what the quality of the commentary is. I think NBA 2K is kind of the gold standard for sports game commentary, and the show is right beneath it. It's very good. They get real sports commentators to do it, and it definitely shows. It sounds like a legitimate sports presentation. Matt Vasgersian, who used to do the show commentary, he actually used to do a bunch of the Sony sports games commentary back when they had like 989 Sports and all that stuff. Like, he was working like on ESPN for a while as a guy doing commentary, you know. I do kind of wish that the show would maybe do what the NBA game does, where they get like the TNT broadcasters to do it, to just provide a little bit of, you know, not legitimacy, but a little bit of familiarity, I guess, with it. It would be cool if maybe the show could partner with like ESPN and maybe get like Sunday Night Baseball presentation in there. And that'd be kind of neat. But then again, that's a lot for me to ask for somebody that's ultimately just going to play it on mute to listen to podcasts while I play. But the actual actual part of playing the game is excellent. So my big thing with the show, and I think everybody plays the show a little bit differently. A lot of people play Diamond Dynasty. That's their blind bag, ultimate team kind of thing. That's not for me. I like Road to the Show. And if you're not familiar with Road to the Show, it is a single player it's career-based game mode. So you start as a minor leaguer and work your way up to the major leagues. and they have put a little bit more story into the game over the years. Like there always were like these kind of small cutscenes of you getting drafted or getting a phone call from your agent. There'll be like a small cutscene when you're in AAA and they're like, oh, we're sending you up to the majors, like that kind of thing. They have since, I believe it started last year, they've actually got like real video clips of MLB Network personalities, and last year's was done in the form of like a podcast. Like they decided to like pick you as an athlete that this podcast was going to follow, and they did that kind of thing. And there would be clips from like Ken Griffey Jr. and Jenny Finch, who was a well-known softball player, and former players and stuff like that. And that was pretty cool. I actually would kind of mute what I was doing and turn those on and listen to them because they were really well done. There's more of that this year, but it's dropped the podcast thing, and there seems to be less of them. I've only had a few pop up along the way. I'm 1.5 seasons already into, I play this game like a maniac. I'm already 1.5 seasons into the mode. I've only had 6 of these things maybe pop up, and previously it was like all the time, like not every other game, but probably like every week to 2 weeks in your calendar, you would get one pop up. So maybe, maybe there was some feedback saying like, hey, there's just too much of this. You can't skip them if you don't want to listen to them. And also if you play more than one career, like I always do one as a pitcher and then I'll eventually do one as a hitter. Like they are the same cutscenes. So I eventually you're just going to skip through them, but I think the show plays great this year. They finally added a little bit more in the character. I always thought that their character creator was actually really good. The hair looks really good. They've actually, for the first time in a long time, new haircuts, new facial hair. So they're making a little bit of progress with that. As somebody who really likes customizing characters, it's nice when that kind of function and feature gets a little bit of love. So I definitely recommend the show 23. I'll be playing the hell out of it, throughout the season. I'm a big baseball fan, so it's definitely not uncommon for me to be watching a real baseball game while also playing the show. So yeah, it's nice to have baseball back and nice to have a good baseball game to play. All right, next up, another new release this week, and kind of an odd one for me because it is a mobile game, and I don't really play mobile games. For the longest time, the only mobile game I had installed on my phone was Angry Birds, just because I liked it. That was it. I didn't really care about other mobile games. I didn't really want to spend a lot of money on mobile games. I don't like, the mechanic of you have to keep paying or you have to pay to get rid of ads or all that stuff. I've played some other mobile games over my life, I guess. I played a little bit of BitLife here and there. I've played some Solitaire on my phone. And then I played, was it like the Game Dev Story, those Kairosoft games? I played a little bit of that. But Mighty Doom came out this week. It is a Doom license. Bethesda is involved with this. They didn't develop it. They had some mobile developer do it, but Mighty Doom is similar to a Vampire Survivors, where you are auto-firing, so it is an auto-firing game, but it is a vertical, not endless runner, but you are moving, basically you have a room, you in a room, and then enemies come in, and then you clear them out, and then you move to the next room and you kind of rinse, repeat, and move along the way. And a lot, as this goes on, you're earning new weapons. Like I have a rocket launcher and a shotgun, and you get points that you can spend. And now you can, when you fire one bullet, you fire 3 bullets, or the bullets ricochet now, and all this different stuff. And I'm sure you can pump real money into this. But it's pretty cool. It's actually like really neat. I've played enough of it that I'm out of kind of like the initial like tutorialization of it, where they're still showing you like, here's how you spend your points and here's how you level up and blah, 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 and all this stuff. I definitely can see the hook. Every time you want to play the game, you have to spend points from this bank that you have. And I have not seen a way to get more points into that bank. I don't know if it's like every 2 days you get more bank, or every 24 hours you get more points, or like whatever it is, or I'm sure you could just pay to get more so you can keep playing the game, but I'm assuming that's kind of like one of the hooks where they get you. There's like skins in the game. I'm assuming you could probably play real money on that. I did see like a slot machine mechanic while I was playing it, but it is a fun game in short bursts. I can't imagine sitting there for a while playing it. Also, I would really hope you have like a pop socket on your phone, because I could not imagine playing this game like holding it like this, and you have to move your finger on the screen to move the guy, which gets to be a problem because eventually, your finger, you're moving him around, and then you're kind of covering the action with your finger. Your phone is only, so big, so you're moving, and now these fingers down here are covering the bottom of the screen, and you can't see what you're doing anymore. So that was kind of like one of the big problems I ran into, but I like it. It's free to download. Check it out. All right. And then, as I continue my search to find something to play in between the big releases, I tried South Park, Fractured Butthole, and fell off of that. I tried Final Fantasy VII Remake. I actually got pretty far into it, but eventually fell off of that. Over a couple weeks ago, I tried Gotham Knights and fell off of that after a week. And so I've decided to try the sequel to a game I didn't like, because of course I'm going to, right? And I picked up Horizon Forbidden West because they put it out on PlayStation Plus, so it's free to download if you have a Plus subscription, and I've put a couple hours into it, and it's actually not bad. I know I'm eventually not going to like it because I didn't like the first one. I didn't like the open world. It's very Ubisoft, where there's just 9 million things to do, and it's this aimless open world. And the beginning of this game, I remember the beginning of the first game somewhat. Like, you had to go through like that competition and all this stuff, and they teach you how to take down the robot animals and all this stuff. Like, I kind of remember that from when I played it. But the beginning of this game is very like narrow, very linear. And all I can keep thinking of is I'm really enjoying it right now, but I know I'm not going to, because this is going to stop. And then the open world stuff is going to happen, and then I'm going to fall off this game. I know this is going to happen, but I am enjoying it. And it keeps thinking in my mind, like, man, what if they just made this game kind of linear and made it sort of like an Uncharted or a God of War and had a little bit of openness to it, but it was mostly just linear. I know for a lot of people, that's not what they want. That's not obviously not what the company wants. Otherwise they would have made the game like that. That's just kind of like what I want. But I am really enjoying it. My only complaint is the look of the game. Like, not graphically. Graphically, it looks really nice. It's very smooth. It's the characters look good. The environments, I'm always a sucker for like a jungle environment. My problem is that the game looks like super saturated. Like, the colors are like too vibrant, like too saturated. And I tried messing around with the HDR settings, and I couldn't really get it to look right. I don't know if maybe it's just the opening environment and the way that looks. And once the game, you go other places, it'll sort itself out. But I was like, I'm not going to touch my TV settings. My TV is like calibrated. I am not going to start messing around with the color settings on my TV and screw it up for other forms of content. This game just needs to get it together. But it just kind of looks like you see those posts online. It's like, oh, check out the shitty HDR. Like, that's kind of like what it looks like. It's very, very saturated. It's very just in your face with color. But the content of the game so far, I am enjoying. I do like it, and I will continue to play it. All right, last game. This will probably be the last week I talk about it, because, I don't want to turn it into, I bring it up every week, but I did finally start cracking into the parts that everybody has been talking about with the story mode in WWE 2K23, the male wrestler My Rise mode, the lock. So eventually, and this is spoilers, I guess, spoilers for WWE game, who would have thought? But eventually you get fired from WWE, and you end up in an airport, and you start conducting business out of this airport, and eventually you end up going into to Japan to wrestle and competing in essentially a giant tournament, which is based on the real giant tournament that happens every year in New Japan Pro Wrestling called the G1. In the game, it's called the Japanese, what do they call it? The Summit or something? I can't remember. They had a name for it. The Apex something. They had some type of name for it. I can't remember what it is.
I wish I could restart my career by going to Japan and competing in a tournament.
Yeah, give it a shot, man. But it's cool. It's neat that they're doing different stuff. You know, I'm really enjoying the story mode in this. I haven't played it in a few days just because the show came out and playing Terra Nil and Horizon and stuff. But, you know, it's not one of those games where I need to rush to get the story done because I want to be, you know, I want to keep up with the discourse online or anything like that. Like that, I don't care. But I was seeing enough spoilers in posts online that was like, it looks like they're kind of making my way towards some interesting stuff. So I'm curious to see where it goes. I think it's cool that so many people that I've seen online are like really involved and invested in a story mode in a WWE game, which is, you know, not something you would really think would happen. You would think most people are just kind of playing the game or playing the universe mode or the MyGM mode, because the single player story mode has often been kind of like the most criticized mode in these games because the stories have been horrible in years past. Like some of them are truly, truly terrible, like nonsensical and just like match type after match type where you have these mandatory win conditions that are like impossible to meet. So you end up just playing the same match like over and over and over again. It's just, it's such a drag and it's really hard to make your way through these. And I would say that most people probably don't ever finish those stories, like make it to completion in those modes. You know, they just eventually bounce off and go on to do something else. But I'm enjoying it. So that was all the games I played, and I know over the past couple of weeks I've kind of turned this into having some thoughts about movies, but there was a video game movie that came out this past week. The Tetris movie came out on Apple TV Plus, wherever the hell the name of it is. The Ted Lasso app, you know, that's all you need to know. You press the button and you get Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso this season, very good. I like the season quite a bit so far. But the Tetris movie, so if you're not familiar with this is the story about how Tetris essentially came to America and it came to the masses, getting the distribution rights in Soviet era Russia. You know, communism was still a thing. That's a big part of this movie is all the political intrigue that was going on and the spying that was going on in the Soviet Union. There are elements of this movie that are like 100% true. They had Alexei Pajitnov, the inventor of Tetris, and Hank Rogers, he's not American. He's from Holland, but he grew up in America. The Dutch American man who helped get the game, you know, to Nintendo. So if you're a fan of video game history, you're going to get a lot out of this movie. There are like major characters, like Howard Lincoln, the attorney for Nintendo, Arakawa from Nintendo, you know, the guy that they have playing the president of Nintendo. God, his name is escaping me at the time. President Nintendo 1990s. Not the guy before Iwata, not Iwata. Oh my God. Hiroshi Yamauchi. The guy that plays him looks exactly like him. I remember when the trailer came out, people were like, oh man, they like digitized Yamauchi into the movie. It's like, no, we just got an actor that looks a lot like him. So I thought that was pretty cool. So there are a lot of like really well-known video game personalities and people that held high positions that you get to see in this movie. So a lot of this movie is true. And then a lot of it is like, so I would say the first 3/4 of the movie are like very grounded and, you know, the story is definitely like insane. And it's like one of those things where it's like, oh, this is definitely like over exaggerated. But, you know, they had these people like work on talk to the people writing the movie and they're like, no, a lot of this stuff actually happened. And I found out about this story. I mean, this was always a story that went on for years and years about how Tetris came to the world out of the Soviet Union. But I really dug into it when I read the book Console Wars, which tells the story of Sega versus Nintendo in the 90s from the perspective of Sega. And there's a chapter in there about Tetris. And there's also a chapter about Tetris, I believe, in the book All Your Base Belong to Us, if I remember right. And it's just like one of those, like, this is such like an insane thing. And then seeing it in the movie, for the first 3/4 of the movie, it's like pretty spot on. You know, obviously some dramatized things. They make the Russians into like these over the top villains and all this stuff. But the back 25% of the movie is definitely like, this is a movie. Like there's a car chase It's like that never happened. They're like racing through an airport, and so like it's very over the top. And you know, it's still very enjoyable. I really, really enjoyed it. I know it's getting some like positive reviews. Like some people are really enjoying it, and then there's some people who are just like, it's not that great. I really like it. I know some people were talking poorly about the fact that it uses like some video game graphics within the storytelling. I thought it was actually done really tastefully, with the exception of, and it wasn't even video game graphics, there's a scene where you see a Russian military demonstration where it's like a big parade with tanks. You know, you'd see this a lot in the world. North Korea does this. You know, a lot of countries with military power in the world have done this, where they just do these big parades showing off their military. The computer graphics on these tanks are laughably bad, like made for TV sci-fi channel bad, like really, really bad. And throughout the movie, you see them use pixelated graphics to represent things in the world. It would have not been out of place to have the real footage with the real people and then have these pixelated tanks. Like they really should have just done that, because it was so bad it took me out of the movie. And I was like, oh, that sucks. Because it's during like a big dramatic, like not a montage, but like you're seeing all these events happen very quickly. They're happening simultaneous with each other as they kind of build tension towards, you know, the climax of the movie. And I was just like, you know, I'm watching it and I'm invested, and I saw that and I was like, oh, wow, that looks like shit. And then I kind of like, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, oh, wait, what just, and I had to like rewind the movie to like catch up on what, you know, dialogue I missed. But I really enjoyed the movie. If you have Apple TV, I definitely suggest checking it out. Taron Egerton, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name. He has been like on fire, man. Cause another thing he did on Apple TV, that Blackbird show, that was fantastic. Like he is killing it lately. I really enjoy it. Very cool cast in the movie. They use a lot of Russian actors, obviously. The guy that plays Alexei Pajitnov, I really liked him quite a bit. He was very, very good. The guy who plays Howard Lincoln is fantastic. Like super, you know, it's just great. So yeah, highly recommended. I enjoyed it quite a bit. But that's going to wrap up what I've been playing, and we'll be back in just a moment with all the news. All right, well, the video game world is in shambles because E3 has been canceled. Oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to get our video game news? This has been, unfortunately, a long time coming. I grew up loving E3. It was this mystical fantasy land that existed in California that only a select few of the video game elite got to go to see video games, and that you hadn't heard of before, and play games that wouldn't come out for years and all this stuff. And, you know, it was, to a kid growing up in the 90s and in the early 2000s, E3 was a really big deal. It was a thing you always really wanted to go to. And obviously the reality of that was very different. Listen to anybody that's been working in video games media and video games press, you know, they have a million great memories to talk about, but then also the logistics of it were not fantastic, you know, standing in line for hours on end, trying to make appointments with people and all that stuff, you know, trying to record footage and get interviews. And I'm sure it was a nightmare, you know, running on no sleep, skeleton crew, all that stuff. But E3 for the longest time really was like a big force and a big symbol in the video game industry. And I still do believe that we do need some type of event where everybody comes together and announce their games. Now, granted, you know, with the advent of the Nintendo Direct and the Sony State of Play and Microsoft Showcase, whatever they're calling they seem to have different names for different versions of things that they do. But, you know, they can kind of do that whenever they want. You know, sometimes Nintendo announces Directs the week of, or even just a few days beforehand. But I still really enjoy the fact that like Jeff Keighley does his Summer Games Fest. I like the idea of a week where all the people involved in making video games are like, okay, let's get together and show some solidarity in this industry, celebrate video games, get people to tune in, get people talking and talk about, you know, what's coming out. I really think that that's still important to this industry. And, you know, everybody's kind of still following suit. You know, yes, there are going to be directs and state of plays throughout the year, but, you know, right now, as it stands, in June of this year, within a few day period, Sony, Microsoft, and then the Summer Games Fest are happening. And I'm sure Nintendo will have something in there. I don't know if they've announced anything yet or not. I think Ubisoft has something going on as well. So you still have that centralized week, or week and a half of events and things to check out. And I think that that's important. And I think it's just kind of a cool thing because you don't really get that anywhere else. It's not like that there's a week of the year where musicians get together and talk about like what they're going to do over the next 12 months, or the film industry really gets together and releases a mass amount of trailers like that. That really doesn't happen. It's something that is kind of unique to the video game industry. And it's kind of a cool thing. It's a lot of fun to watch. I know people that take days off from work to watch E3. I certainly enjoy, Microsoft and Sony typically do their stuff on the weekends. I will definitely make sure I am home to tune in, grab a snack, watch their presentation and see what's going on. This year, for the stuff that happens during a time frame when I can do it, I'm going to try and record like live reactions to it and put them up on the channel. It's just kind of a fun thing to do. So yes, the death of E3 was a long time coming. I don't think it's something, a lot of people have been celebrating it and talk about how great it is that E3 is dead. People lost their jobs. There are going to be people that lose their job out of this. There are going to be people that were hired in years past to build sets and to do catering and all that stuff. And now they're losing a big account and all that. So it's not cool. It's not hip to make fun of E3 dying. Yes, E3 has kind of become a joke over the past few years. But it's still kind of sad and, definitely going to remain ever nostalgic for memories of E3 past. Every once in a while I still think about like, oh, I remember that E3 when that happened, and you go on YouTube and you can relive the moment, the big PlayStation press conference where they like buried Xbox with like having to turn your system online every 24 hours or you couldn't play used games. When Sony announced the PS1, that was a big deal. The Kinect debacle with Microsoft. There's been a lot of really cool moments over the years. And we wouldn't have gotten that if E3 didn't exist. So it's a shame. Pour one out on the grave of E3, and at least Keighley Summer Games Fest is still going. I enjoy that event. It's a lot of fun, but yeah. Sad to see E3 go, and sad to see it end in such a kind of depressing fashion.
Don't worry, I'm going to restart E3 next year in my apartment. You can all come over and play the hottest Atari 5200 titles like Vomit Stains You Can't Get Out no matter how many showers you take. It's an RPG.
Cool, man. I'm glad that's happening for you. Awesome. So, like I said at the beginning of the show, kind of a light week for news. Kind of the biggest thing that happened before the E3 thing was that Nintendo showed off a gameplay video of Tears of the Kingdom, the next Zelda game that's coming out next month. I am not a Zelda fan, but I did check it out just to kind of see if it was something radically different. So to my eyes, is not a Zelda fan. This just looks like more Breath of the Wild. I could be wrong, but maybe it's just the art style. I really think that if you take a screenshot from this game and a screenshot from Breath of the Wild and show it to somebody that's never seen Zelda before, they would probably tell you it's the same game. And I'm not saying that every sequel or iteration on a franchise has to look radically different or anything like that, but Zelda has definitely been a franchise that has screwed around with visual style over the years. Although I would say, from an outsider looking in, it's pretty much kind of looked the same since Twilight Princess. Breath of the Wild definitely has a very distinct art style versus like GameCube and Wii era Zelda, but they've kind of honed in on their certain brand of fantasy look to everything over the past decade and a half or so. As a non-Zelda fan, this game doesn't do anything for me. It's not making me desperately run out and buy another Switch so I could play this game or anything like that. I didn't play Breath of the Wild. I have not played a Zelda game. Oh God. What was the 3DS one? Link Between Worlds? I think that was the last one I played. I've certainly never finished a Zelda game. It is probably the biggest dark spot on my video game literacy, for lack of a better term. It's just a series I never got into, a series that just never clicked with me. I tried and it just never worked. I've heard people say that people that know me and know the kind of games that I like, that I actually might like Breath of the Wild. So I've actually been thinking about tinkering around with seeing if maybe I could get some Switch emulation up and running on my computer, and if I can, I will try it at the very least. I will try Breath of the Wild. It just, when I look at the way that game plays, it has so many things that I don't like in video games. I like open world games, but I like open world games with a direction. You know, these games seemingly, in Tears of the Kingdom looks like more of it with all their crafting and all this different stuff you can do, where it really is kind of like a sandbox. And I don't do well with sandbox games. I just don't have that level of creativity when it comes to problem solving in video games, to really mess around with it and take advantage. It's very weird. In my professional life, working at jobs, I've always been very good at problem solving and coming up with creative solutions. But if you hand me a sandbox video game with infinite options, I crumble immediately. Like, I can't think of it. You know, people are always like, oh, you know, you got to think outside the box. I want the box. I live inside the box. I like thinking inside the box to come up with a creative solution, not outside the box. I like, you know, desperate solutions with limited options, you know, like that's kind of the way my brain works. So I get overwhelmed in games like this. I feel lost. I feel like I'm not making any progress, and eventually that just leads me to just not want to play them. But for the people that this game is for, the reactions to this footage has been fantastic. People are like super into it. I've talked to a couple people over the past week that were like, dude, cannot wait. Like, cannot get here fast enough, you know? So I'm very glad for the fans, and I hope it. My biggest problem is, and I don't mean to sound immediately negative on this or anything, I just hope it runs well. You know, I haven't had a Switch in a little while now. It's been about a year and a half or so since I've had a Switch, maybe a little bit less than that. And towards the tail end of having a Switch, you know, there were a lot of games that I was getting that were first-party Nintendo games that were not running well, even when it was docked, let alone handheld. So I just hope the game runs smooth, you know, but if somebody's going to get it to work well on the Switch, it's going to be Nintendo. You know, you look at a game like Mario Odyssey and it's like, man, that game should like melt your Switch, but they made it work. I never had a single problem playing that game. I had no issues with it performance-wise whatsoever. But then Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu or whatever it was, I played that and it was at like negative 12 frames a second. I was like, how did they release this? Like, how is this a product put out by Nintendo on their own system? Like, it just kind of blew my mind. But, you know, I hope that everybody kind of gets what they are hoping for with this game, and I hope it does really well. I expect it will. Next up, in kind of bizarre news, Multiversus, the Warner Brothers Smash Brothers-esque game, is shutting down, not for good. They've claimed that their open beta is over with, and I honestly forgot it was an open beta. I figured they just released it at this point. They were charging real money for characters in the game and different things in the game, and they have said that in June they're shutting it down and it'll be back some point in the beginning of next year. It's interesting because, you know, in some ways that's what an open beta is, you know, like it, you know, betas go away and then eventually, you know, the 1.0 release comes out. But I think it definitely kind of caught people off guard, not just people that were like fans of the game, but people that just kind of talk about video games on the internet and cover games and all that stuff. It's just like, wait, whoa, that game was kind of big. People were spending money on it. It wasn't out of open beta. Like, it just kind of like took everybody by surprise, and all the like podcasts I listened to this week and news articles I read and stuff, there was just a lot of confusion. That was just like, man, this kind of doesn't really happen anymore. Games go into early access, they just stay in early access, and people can keep playing them and playing them and playing them, and they iterate on them and iterate on them, and then eventually, you know, you get your big post. It's like, oh, we're finally going 1.0 and we're raising the price of the game $10. Like, that happens all the time, you know. So I was really surprised by this. I was kind of taken aback by it, if you will. I hope that it comes back. I imagine it will. It was fairly successful, fairly well received. I think that's going to alienate some of the fan base that doesn't quite understand this concept by the fact that they spent all this money on it potentially, and now it's going away and they can't play it until next year. So that's going to suck. But I think it will eventually pop back up. Next up, kind of going off of what I was talking about earlier with potentially getting into Switch emulation, Dlophin has launched on Steam. If you're not familiar, Dlophin is a GameCube and Wii emulator. I have used Dlophin extensively in the past to play GameCube games. And one of the big things with Dlophin is, especially for Wii games, is you can up-res them into like full HD and they look really, really nice. I've seen footage of like the Zelda Skyward Sword looking really, really well. Like Mario Galaxy looking quite good. And even like GameCube games, they run like super, super smooth. And of course, a lot of games back in that era, the PS2, GameCube, Xbox era, a lot of those games just kind of ran at 60 frames a second by default. Especially if you look at like the classic like PS2 action platformer kind of games like Jack and Ratchet and Clank and all that. Like a lot of those just kind of ran really smooth to begin with. But I mean, I remember playing some GameCube stuff on Dlophin and kind of comparing it to my memories of playing it on an actual GameCube. I'm like, man, this is pretty nice. Not bad. It was one of my biggest problems with the GameCube library was the F-Zero game that came out on that. I grew up a huge F-Zero fan, and my problem with the F-Zero was a GX on the GameCube was it was like super dark. Like I always felt like I could never see anything in that game. And then I ran it on Dlophin and I was able to mess with the graphical settings and mess with some brightness stuff, and it was like this looks great. And it plays super smooth. It was running at a locked perfect 60 frames a second, no issues whatsoever. Totally fine playing it with like an Xbox One controller. Felt great. So Dlophin is pretty cool. And this isn't new with emulation coming to Steam. You can get RetroArch or RetroArch, however you pronounce it. You can get that on Steam. You can get RetroArch on Xbox. I've been thinking about for a while putting it on my Xbox One and loading up some ROMs on that to kind of play some. Actually, I've been in the mood lately to play some like N64 games. So I've been thinking about doing that and getting that up and running on there. I have a Raspberry Pi, but my Raspberry Pi is specifically just arcade games. I have, the hard drive is loaded on my Raspberry Pi with just arcade emulation. And I don't want to start messing around with that to add other systems because it's working fine. And, eventually I'll, do something wrong, put the wrong file in the wrong directory or something and screw it all up. And I don't really want to do that. So I want to just keep that as is. But yeah, it's cool. I don't really have a reason to use Dlophin on Steam because I can just load Dlophin. I don't have a Steam Deck. If you have a Steam Deck, obviously this is huge because now you can play all these Wii and GameCube games on your Steam Deck. And that's awesome. There are ways already to get multiple emulators up and running on the Steam Deck, but it's in an official capacity now, so it's pretty cool. All right. In a bit of BioWare news, the Mass Effect team is shifting over to help wrap up Dragon Age 4, also known as Dragon Age Dreadwolf. So this is coming from Video Games Chronicle. Mark Dara is working with the studio to help complete Dragon Age Dreadwolf. He eventually he did, but undid. He retired from BioWare a couple years ago. He was there for a really long time. He did a lot of work on Baldur's Gate and was executive producer of the Dragon Age series, so he's certainly not unfamiliar with the series. And it sounds that the entire Mass Effect team is now assisting with Dreadwolf to get it ready, and then they have kind of splintered off a handful of employees to continue work on the next Mass Effect, which really shows you how far away that next Mass Effect is. Now, Dragon Age, I would like to think that it comes out this year. They've been talking about it for so long. They've kind of torn it down and built it back up, I think at least twice at this point. So I want to see what they do. I really like the original Dragon Age. I thought that was a solid game. I didn't particularly care for Dragon Age 2 that much. And then Inquisition. So Inquisition was really the blueprint for Mass Effect Andromeda. And I don't mean that with it being like a buggy mess or anything like that. Like nothing to do with that. But the way that game worked, kind of that pseudo open world instance kind of thing, that illusion of true open worldness. That was very much what Mass Effect Andromeda was. You would go to these planets, you have this open area to explore with all these objective markers on the screen, like like a Ubisoft game would have. And then you would go and complete your tasks, and that's how you played the game. And I didn't really like that. I didn't like it in Dragon Age, and I certainly didn't really like it in Andromeda. I did finish Andromeda just because I am a huge Mass Effect fan, but it wasn't enough when it came out for me to finish Inquisition. I think I only probably put maybe a dozen hours or so into Inquisition, and I didn't, to be perfectly honest, I didn't think it was all that impressive. I just didn't particularly care for it. But part of me, somewhere deep down, despite the fact that there have been so much turnover at BioWare, I still think that they are capable of putting out a good game. It's been a while since they have done it. At one point in time, I would have argued that they were the best game developer, pound for pound, out there in the world. Like right up there with Rockstar. And this was kind of like pre-Naughty Dog becoming the Naughty Dog we know them today. But, Rockstar was really big at the time. And I would say that, that run of like Jade Empire into Mass Effect 2, into Dragon Age 1, like they were like untouchable, and it really didn't unravel really for them. And I mean, Dragon Age 2 got a lot of criticism, but it was obviously Mass Effect 3 where, like the owners of the company had left, EA pressured them to get the game out in a very short amount of time. The multiplayer, I know people really like that multiplayer, but that multiplayer was really shoehorned into that game. That requirement of that like galactic readiness level to unlock better endings at the end of the game was very not a great thing. They had to like fix the story of the game through DLC. Like there are obviously a lot of issues with that game, and that's really kind of where it all fell apart. And then obviously like the huge public embarrassment that was the 1-2 punch of Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. And they've been really, really on the ropes ever since. And it's going to be tough for them to recover and tough for them to kind of win back that beloved nature as a studio. I still think that they can do it. I think that there's a lot of talent in that studio. The Mass Effect lore is very strong. There's enough to pull from to craft a really interesting and engaging story that fans and newcomers will enjoy. I've played a lot less of Dragon Age, so I can't necessarily say if the same rings true for that, but I really hope that Dragon Age does well. And of course, as Mass Effect is near and dear to my heart, one of my all-time favorite franchises, of course, I want the next Mass Effect to do well for them as well. So we'll see what happens. All right. Well, it sounds like the PlayStation VR2 headset is off to a rough start. Bloomberg has reported that they have sold less than 300,000 units in the first month. And it says that it has caused people to bring up, well, maybe you should lower the price because this does cost more than a PS5. And I think the cost certainly has something to do with it, but I think that there are some other issues with that headset as well.
All they need is a marquee title, like A Day in the Life of Christian Slater. Follow me along in a stunning AAA VR experience as I torment a sack of shit while he tries to get his life together by making YouTube videos that no one watches.
Yeah. I agree with part of that. The sack of shit part. No, Christian is right. They need games. There's no backwards compatibility on that headset. One of the games that people really loved on the original PlayStation VR, the Astrobot game, you can't play it. I know there's so many people, myself included, they were like, oh man, the PSVR 2 comes out now. I can play some of those games I missed the first time around. I can play the Astrobot game. Well, you can't because there's no backwards compatibility. You just can't do it. And a lot of the games that are available to the PSVR 2 are games that have been out for a while. Job Simulator, Vacation Simulator, stuff like that. And it also is lacking a lot of the PC VR games and experiences that people really enjoy. Like Google Maps VR is not available on it. I didn't see, there were like classic VR games like Super Hot VR, I don't think is on there. And there's nothing like really new and exclusive aside from that Horizon thing to really bring people in. And are you really going to spend $500 or $600 with that bundle that comes with Horizon to get a very flashy, and I don't even want to say flashy because flashy implies that it's style over substance, that it's lacking, that there's a void. There really isn't. It's a fantastic VR headset, probably one of the best ever made from a technical perspective. It's got OLED screens in the lenses. Everybody that has one that I've seen loves it, but there's nothing to play on it, and people aren't going to devote resources to making games for something that has a tiny install base that doesn't have any upside right now. So I would not be surprised if summertime, the traditional E3 window, when they have their presentation, they go, oh yeah, by the way, we're dropping PSVR down to $400. And then you piss off all the people that spent $550 with no library whatsoever to back it up. So it's really tough. I don't want to say that they probably shouldn't have released this, but they shouldn't have released it without having games. You can have the coolest video game system in the world, but if you don't have games to play on it, then what does it matter? Because at that point, it's just a hunk of plastic sitting in someone's living room. You've got to have stuff to back it up. What has everybody been saying about Xbox? Xbox doesn't have games, right? The only thing that really saves it is Game Pass, right? And they don't even have that for VR. This is a console, quote unquote, a method of playing video games that really has nothing that anybody wants to play. And it's super expensive. It's the most expensive piece of video game hardware outside of PC exclusive VR headsets on the market. And it's just like, okay, cool. We're back to like the 3DO. We're back to, I don't even want to say we're back to the Neo Geo, which was like almost $1,000 back then, but at least it had Neo Geo games, which are some of the greatest games of all time to play on it. This doesn't really have much of anything. And then to wrap things up, The Last of Us on PC has launched, but it is not launched well. There are a ton of bugs, performance issues, crashes. It is really, really rough. They've been racing to get patches out to fix these performance issues, but it seems like as of my time recording this, they still have not worked out all the bugs.
I've been there. Every guy has problems with his launch after about 45.
Yeah, true. I've seen screenshots of how bad it looks. There's some like textures missing, or like people are showing up, I guess, like T-posing, and it's crashing constantly for people. That's a real shame. I had a coworker that was looking forward to playing it, and he didn't pick it up because of all the issues that were going on with it. And it's bad timing too. I think they I don't want to say they rushed this, because I think this did get delayed at some point, but they're coming off such a high with The Last of Us doing well on HBO Max, and obviously they timed this to come out right after the show wrapped up, to get people interested in playing it. And it's just, leaves Sony with a little bit of egg on their face, I guess, with this. But, console games going to PC well after, their initial release date, not day and date release dates. This is an old tale. This is, Deckard Cain telling you to sit down and listen and stay a while. How many times have we been through this? This isn't new, but it sucks when it's such a high profile game coming from such a high profile publisher. Especially when, there are a lot of stakes because they've turned The Last of Us into a media franchise and not just a video game anymore. So it's a shame, but they've already patched it twice. I imagine more patches are coming, and I assume probably within the next week to two, it'll probably be sorted out for the most part. I know some of the previous PlayStation ports launched in some rough shape. I think that Horizon port didn't go off to the best start, and they eventually figured that out. Same with that Uncharted one, and they're okay now. So I assume the same would happen for this. So it's a shame, but it'll get fixed. I'm sure of it. But that's going to wrap up the show for this week. So coming up on the channel, I'm just about done with that next Perfect Reload video. I think I'll probably have it out in time for this week. Last week I said it was either going to be this previous week or this coming week. I'm not quite done with it yet. I have maybe a couple more hours to do, but I should be able to get it up on Friday this week. So check that out. And other than that, I guess we'll talk to you next week. Christian, any parting words before we go, buddy?
Are you at all concerned with the quantity of pork chops you consume?
I am. We'll see you next week.